So the project was started to address the lack of empirical research on the death penalty in India. Much of the state of death penalty research focuses only on analysis of Supreme Court judgments. And whereas if you see the death penalty discussions in other retentionist jurisdictions like Japan and the United States, the discussion is based on so much sophisticated empirical research that we thought that for a more informed discussion on the death penalty, we needed to start building that empirical basis to show the people of this country as to the realities of the administration of the death penalty in India. And I think that would lead to a more informed discussion rather than just taking political positions on the death penalty. The idea with which the project was started was to document the socioeconomic profile of death row prisoners in India, to understand as to who gets the death penalty in India, and also to understand what their interaction with the criminal justice system was.
We basically wanted to interview all of India's death row prisoners and their family members. The first question was, let's figure out how many prisoners there are on death row. And we were quite surprised to know that there isn't basically a database of these prisoners somewhere, right? So you had to basically write out to all of the prisons and to the prison departments and get lists from each of them and then consolidate all of that. We carried out the interviews from June 2013 to January 2015, and in this time period there were about 385 prisoners on death row in India. But we were able to include only 373 as part of our study because the state of Tamil Nadu did not give us permission to interview prisoners there. Along with that, the state of Maharashtra also did not give us permission to interview prisoners who were involved in terror offences. But other than that, we have covered the prisoners in our study, which comes up to a total of 373. So in India, the capital punishment can be given for both homicide and non-homicide offences. As far as the socio-economic profile of the prisoners sentenced to death is concerned, our main finding has been that these are prisoners who are extremely marginalized, have belonged to very, very poor backgrounds and have really had no means of defending themselves properly in their cases. Now, if we consider their social profile, about 60% of them belong to scheduled caste, scheduled tribes or other backward classes. Then another 75% of prisoners were actually economically vulnerable, and this vulnerability, we analyzed that from the occupation that the prisoners were doing at the time that they were arrested. If we consider the kind of criminal antecedents with which these prisoners came, about 88% of the prisoners had no prior criminal history.
One thing that we came across quite significantly was the question of age and how the sort of claims of juvenility are dealt with, and how there's a very serious concern about that amongst death row prisoners, of nearly about 18 prisoners claiming to be juvenile when they were first arrested. But given the state of document keeping in this country, those are claims that are so difficult to pursue, and but that I would sort of flag that as a very serious concern. Another thing that we must really be concerned about is the quality and the state of legal representation that death row prisoners in this country have received. Very significant issues in terms of the quality that we got to hear about, and it's not just a question of legal aid versus private representation. At the trial court level and at the high court level, we see nearly 60% of death row prisoners having private legal representation, and that's interesting if you compare it with the fact that a vast majority of them are extremely poor. So how do we explain that? And I think it was very revealing for us to see the sort of massive distrust of the legal aid system, and how much the prisoners and their families would do to ensure that they did not have legal aid lawyers, and they would drive themselves into further debt. Now, in terms of their interaction with the criminal justice system. We started looking at how they were treated in police custody, and that is so integrally tied to the question of how evidence is gathered in these cases. Rampant custodial torture. One thing that became very evident to us when the prisoners spoke of the trial, and when we tried discussing with them if they had any knowledge of the evidence in their cases, I think one thing really stood out was that the most irrelevant person in this entire proceeding was a prisoner himself or herself, right? Had absolutely no clue of, most of them, and had absolutely no clue of what had happened in the case. We've also done another study that's part of the report of tracking what happened to death penalty cases in the last 15 years of the sentences that were given by the trial courts. And that's quite a different study. And there, the finding has been quite revealing that of every 100 death sentences that trial courts give, only 4.5% are ultimately confirmed by the Supreme Court. 30% of every 100 death sentences that trial courts in India give end up in acquittals in the appellate process. So you move from death penalty to complete acquittal in 30% of these cases, and a further 65% are commuted within the appellate process. And that really shows shocking levels of the exaggerated use of the death penalty in the legal system.
So during the fieldwork phase is when we had to go into the field, track families, and interview prisoners as well as families. So the family tracking part was challenging in terms of we had to go to places none of us had ever been before. We had to go to villages that were really remote, and just finding the villages and locating the families was a challenge in itself. Also, once you come into the village, you know that these cases are high profile cases. You know that you can't really directly ask क्या आप उनके बेटे या उनके बेटी को जानते हैं जिन्होंने वो कत्ल किया. You can't really straightforward ask about the case because you don't know what are the sort of repercussions that the family has already faced and what they will face if we resurrect all these things in the village. Apart from that, the prisoner interviews are also, it's a different sort of challenge because again, you're talking to a person who's not had to recount this. Not many people have asked them their story, right? So most of them are really willing to talk to you, but they're also having to remember things, like they have to remember what it was to be in police custody and how they were tortured, and like just all these memories that come out and all sorts of emotions that come out.
There's a deep sense of crisis in the criminal justice system on multiple fronts, and the question we really need to ask is whether it is a system that is capable of administering in any fair manner the harshest punishment that we have within our legal system. And I think the criminal justice system imposes extremely severe burdens on anybody who comes in conflict with it. And we see that these burdens have a disparate impact on the most marginalized sections of our society. And I think this problem only gets aggravated in the context of the death penalty when the nature of the punishment is so unique. Unique because of its daily suffering and the grappling with life or death questions on an everyday basis, and I think that's what makes it different.
If you ask about the possible solutions that can be made to these different problems, I think that the first thing for us to do would be to come together as a society and try and move away from the question of whether the death penalty should or should not exist in our society, right? Because that's where much of the discourse currently lies. And I think that is that discourse is quite lacking, because that discourse, while it covers the philosophical reasons as to whether a state should be allowed to kill or not if a certain individual is convicted of killing another human being, while I think that the current debate covers these philosophical questions, what it seriously lacks is any kind of analysis in terms of who is getting this death sentence in our country and what is the process through which they are going in suffering from this punishment. Because this punishment is unlike any other punishment that we have on the statute books. It would also lead us to points where we would try and ensure that they get good legal representation in their cases, that they are the kind of procedural violations which they suffer from when they are arrested, where they are not even told about the grounds of their arrest or are often not produced before the magistrate. These problems would then become extremely obvious to us if we start with understanding the kind of experience that they go through.